All right, welcome for this brief Canadian Patriot podcast where I am very happy to be joined by my good friend Anton Chaitkin, who has some very important insights to share pertaining to the world geostrategic situation. Anton, thank you for joining me. How are you doing?
Thank you, Matt. I'm doing pretty well. How are you in this?
Good. I mean, as good as can be expected, right? We're trying to stay creative and make the best of a really bad deteriorating situation. And I know you're a very solution oriented thinker. Your mind is really wired to think through pathways towards avoiding war. You've been doing this for many decades. So you called me up the other day and you shared a few, I found, pretty strategic, important insights that merited a very short little chat here and a exposition for the audience. We only have about 30 minutes today to do this, so why don't you go through a little bit what your concerns are based upon this foreign affairs announcement and strategic or unstrategic call to action that could inflame World War III.
Uh, yeah, thanks. This is really an urgent appeal that I'm making to people to pay attention to a process that has really a good side to it and a bad side. The good side is that the people we're talking about in the leadership of the globalist clique are desperate, and it's shown very well by what we're going to discuss. So they could be taken down. Um, the current issue of the magazine put out by the Council on Foreign Relations has a very dramatic and, in a sense, hysterical proposal. Usually this is a very sedate organization. Their proposal is for a massive missile attack against Russia right away to escalate that war in Ukraine by supplying Ukraine with American missiles without any restraint to attack Russian
Wow.
airports, defense installations, and so forth all over Russia, and not to worry about World War III. The Russians will back down, they assure us. They're afraid of our superior technology and weapons. Now, in this proposal, they say the public in America will no longer support what they call forever wars. And so this is the article: the right way to quickly end. You can put it up again.
Yep.
The right way to quickly end the war in Ukraine. Washington should give it the tools to win. And by that, they're not talking about peace. They're talking about a massive escalation. You can read this article. It's online. It's the current issue of this Foreign Affairs magazine, representing that famous Council on Foreign Relations. Now, they say, why is this necessary? Because the public does no longer support the forever wars, and not just this war, but I think the other one too, in Gaza. They don't mention that other one, but they do say forever wars, and they say that Donald Trump promises to end this war within 24 hours if he is reelected. Therefore, they want to have an escalation now. They also leave open the possibility that Trump, maybe they can terrify Trump into doing, or maybe they can get him to sell out
Mm.
and to escalate the war in this fashion if he were to become president. Or maybe they have in mind some other way of preventing him from becoming president, which we've seen the assassination attempt just a few days before this proposal came out.
Right.
So the same magazine back in 2019, under the editor Daniel, his name is Daniel Kurtz-Phelan, Phelan, put out an article, and it was on the cover of that magazine in 2019, and the title was, who will run the world? There it is. Who will run the world? And they're talking about the American or US-led liberal international order.
Yeah, and you have here the Chinese dragon in red, and you got the American eagle in blue.
Yeah.
Very,
But they
very.
don't, they're not really talking about America.
Hmm.
And they're really not even talking about China. They're talking about the two concepts of the world. One of them run by this clique of Anglo-Americans and their friends in NATO and in the European Union versus the China, I guess the China-led resistance to that. And this is a terrible division of the two choices. One choice put out by these oligarchs saying that they should run the world. They're not really talking about America. There's no sense of American interest or American nationality. It's this order which is creating chaos and now proposing to go towards World War III.
Yeah, and it coming from the CFR as well is super important for people to hold in mind, since this is the British Roundtable movement's penetration into the United States that goes back over a century into the past when they set up the CFR as the American branch of Chatham House. So this is not an American entity in any way that's calling for this paradigm to be enacted. So
that's right. Yeah. This organization was set up in 1921. And it was set up as a twin to the Royal Institute for International Affairs, both of them on the recommendation of the British Imperial Group, the Round Table. Now, the editor of this magazine, Daniel Kurtz Phelan, was previously an advisor to Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, and before 2016, and before that to the State Department. So he was in on the and before that he was, I guess, with Barack Obama. He's a young man, but this is the hardline globalist pro-war faction, risking the world and the future of mankind by an insane proposal for all-out war with Russia. Now, if you notice, Israel has begun in the last several days, has carried out a strike, a military attack against both Lebanon and then Iran itself, inside Iran. Both of them very provocative. They discuss it as if it were in retaliation for something or other, but there's never been a strike from Israel of these kinds, and especially a direct attack against Iran. So in my view, what you're looking at here is in a fulfillment of this program for an escalation immediately. The U.S. government, as this article in the CFR magazine points out, the U.S. government has been avoiding, to a certain extent, the full-scale attack on Russia for fear of having a nuclear war. That's what they say. They're trying to taunt the Biden-Harris administration into, by calling them cowards or whatever. But this is an escalation that will bring Russia in if it's not stopped. If Israel keeps going, and if you get a war going between Israel and Iran or other states in that region, Russia is going to take the decision, as they did with Syria, after the Libya attacks, and then Syria attacks by the intervention of the Anglo-Americans in Syria. Russia said, we can't allow this. We saw what happened to Libya. We're not going to allow states around our periphery to be overthrown and put into chaos.
Yes.
And this is going to cause a direct confrontation between the United States and Russia and World War III if it's not stopped. So I want to just mention what's the state of mind of these people. If you look at and I hesitate to say this, but I want people to get an image in their minds. Remember the grotesque show that was put on at the Olympics, the
Yes.
pre-show, where they had people dressed as drag queens. They had uh, crazy clownery and mockery of the Last Supper of Leonardo da Vinci. I wouldn't get too hung up on how evil that was, which it was, but the real issue is the state of mind of the highest leadership, not these clowns that would put themselves into a show like that. There is a commonality between the highest leadership of this anti-US and anti-civilization oligarchy with these clowns. And that is, they don't look to the future of mankind. They are stone cold about any future generations.
Yes.
As far as they're concerned, they have to hang on to power. There's no other consideration. They're not fathers or grandfathers or mothers or grandmothers. They don't look to the future of humanity. They're not going to build new science and industry and things that will sustain mankind and a growing population. They're not happy about anything has to do with supporting a future for families on this planet. That's a common idea. So it's really a satanic ideology in this international clique. Now, I want to contrast that with what America did, both positively and negatively, for all the countries involved. Let's start with Israel and the Jews. The United States was a home to all oppressed and refugees from Europe in particular. And many Jewish people came to the United States in the 19th and early 20th century as refugees from disaster in Europe. This is before Hitler. There grew up a large Jewish community, particularly in New York and some of the other big cities. These are immigrants. That, to me, that's a very positive sign. That goes back to George Washington. We are a tolerant and a multi, we're part of, we're bringing civilization here and giving it a new life.
Mm-hmm.
So then in 1948, after the US was under the sway of Churchill, the Truman administration was the one that said, we are not going to have a democracy in Palestine. We are going to set up a religious denominated state in which only Jews are full citizens, and everyone else, especially those that they're at war with in the region, right? Mm-hmm. That they are going to be either second-class citizens or murdered, right. And that becomes the situation. So the United States changed from our outlook in previous times into setting up a machine for destruction in that area. Look at Iran. Now, in 1911, the Persia then was called, had an American treasurer. His name was William M. Schuster, Shuster. For just in that year, 1911, he went there at the request of the newly democratic regime of Iran, of Persia.
Really?
And it was to try to get Iran's finances going so that they could explicitly resist the empires of Britain and Russia. Eventually, Britain did take over Iran after that, and their oil took over. And in 1953, the United States, again, in collaboration with British intelligence, MI6, the US CIA, and overthrew the elected democratic government of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, explicitly democratic, explicitly trying to help the people of that country. As a result, we had chaos and then the present regime. there were many other crazy adventures by our pro-imperial faction in Iran after that to cause the present hostility between our countries. You have to go back to that. USA, as you and I both have reported, and others, has helped Russia. Russia has helped America in the 18th and 19th centuries. We were allies in World War II. After the war, under Churchill's influence, the United States went along with the decision to impose a divided world. And therefore, Kennedy tried to lift that and wanted cooperation with the Russians, worked for cooperation throughout the Middle East as well. He was murdered. And I believe that you could look to these crazed escalation people as the state of mind of the people that killed Kennedy. So that's gives you a kind of a sum up. The USA in its own right as an influence, America has always had a positive influence on the world. When the USA was under the influence of this foreign imperialist point of view, then we took the side of those European imperialists against the interests of both our own country and these countries. Mm-hmm. Right now, the USA is not led by people, and I take this all the way back to Kennedy, his death, after his death. It's not led by people who are acting in the American interest. They're acting for the interest of a clique whose power is supremely dangerous for the survival of the human race. So I wanted to alert people to this escalation proposal. It has to be scotched. We need sane people to come forward and say, we have to back off of these two wars and prevent the disaster which this clique is calling for. This is the globalist leadership. Mm-hmm. And so that they have to be identified as such.
If you were speaking to somebody, and we get these debates a lot, who is a well-intentioned person, but otherwise maybe cynical and black-pilled about the possibility of the United States redeeming itself and saving itself from disaster. What advice would you give those people who think that the US is too far gone and that maybe a major war is going to be somehow necessary with this unredeemable empire? How would you speak to this mindset and in such a way that they could both understand? Well, I think you've done a good job to at least communicate that there is this historical, better tradition of the real authentic United States that does look out for its own self-interest in an honest way and is not an empire. But how would you convince anyone or those people that this is redeemable today, that this could be revived today? What are those pathways?
Well, let's look at it from a negative side. Supposing that Trump gets to be president, and as his first, in his first few days, he were to escalate the war with Israel or with Russia, this would be catastrophic. It would be politically similar to him having been assassinated, which would have caused I would say the collapse of the country. I think that would cause the collapse of the country. So if he's going to maintain his base in any way against all the opposition that he faces, he would have to follow through with what amounts to his main claim to people's allegiance, namely that he's safer in terms of blowing the world up than the present administration. That's a negative side to it. What's the program of the Democratic Party? It doesn't have a program. There is no appeal to the population, to the general population. It's everything is a scare tactic. But the Democratic Party in the past had under Roosevelt and Kennedy the most beautiful power, political power that was resonating in the population. Kennedy in 1963, before he was killed, was developing a powerful coalition with the civil rights movement and the auto workers and small business, and he was admired and respected throughout the world. He was also backing off of a war with Russia while strengthening the United States.
Mm-hmm.
The present regime is weakening the United States. What's wrong with the outlook of people that you say can't envision the U.S. doing anything right? What's wrong with their viewpoint is that these guys have nothing to offer the population.
Mm-hmm.
So if the population has any thought to its self-interest, and if politicians want to have any kind of following, they're going to have to come through with some kind of a program in the interest of the United States. Absolutely. Which hasn't happened for decades now. I know that you don't see that until you go back some in history.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that they've come to the end of the line. That's why they've made this crazy proposal. The public doesn't support these wars anymore, and one reason we haven't supplied the massive attack armaments to Ukraine is that we don't have the industrial machine anymore to create it. This is finished. There's no future for this. They could go out with a bang.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to let them do that? You remember how fireworks work on the 4th of July? You get these beautiful fireworks, and then at the very end, they complete the process by shooting off about 15 different things at a time.
Yeah.
With big white bangs and beautiful fluorescence, and it's a tremendous show, and everybody applauds. That's what these guys are trying to do. They want to shoot everything they have in order to try to stave off the end of their control.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what will follow their control? Will it be at the end of the world? Because they're clearly saying after us, the world comes to an end. The USA will be put into a war with the rest of the world. How can you prevent that kind of a catastrophe? If you think the USA can be just left out of doing positive things in the world, then you haven't accounted for the fact that the USA is loaded to the gills with H-bombs.
Mm-hmm.
And they're in the air right now in bombers. And I don't think you can count on the Russians or the Chinese or whoever to shoot them all down. So the point is that the United States needs to be corrected now in the interest of its own people, and to go back to when the United States was a blessing and not a curse to mankind. The USA gave the world electricity. The USA gave the world the moon landing. The USA gave the world a beautiful constitution that we had as a good example of how you could have an orderly society. Right. The present leadership of this clique, this transatlantic clique, these globalists, do not believe in order. They talk about a liberal international order. That's not order. It's complete chaos, constant chaos, wars all the time, refugees all the time, no families, no future, no support for the population, total chaos. That's their point of view. That's got to come to an end.
Yeah. Well, as Franklin Roosevelt once famously said, that there are certain few amongst us on this earth who wish to have a new world order, and I'll tell you, it is not new, and it is not order.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
I think that's a very, very, very important point that the great president made, and also that we have nothing to fear but fear itself. And I think that that's another important lesson and attitude going into the current crisis, is keeping our heads on our shoulders and having a good knowledge of the terrain that we're operating on, to think 5 times before every action. Like, don't run into things based on an emotion. We're being provoked left and right emotionally to get us into a very reactionary state. And we have to make sure that people don't fall into those traps that have been used against humanity so many times in the past to get us to cannibalize ourselves, go into crusading wars, go into civil wars. And now's the time that these lessons that you're bringing to the table need to really be internalized by
One more
citizens,
point.
policymakers, and everything. So, what's your last point? And then we'll.
One more point.
Yes.
John Kennedy was a veteran of World War II. And he was really played a very good role as a in the Navy. President Roosevelt was a leader of that war. He wasn't in the war himself, but let's go back to General Grant. Kennedy and General Grant were both. Kennedy knew what war was like. He wasn't a chicken hawk. He wanted to save people from the horrors that he knew as a real soldier, real sailor. Go back to General Grant. He was trying to get peace in the world. He had been the leader of the Union forces. He knew war. He hated that war that he was in. And so when he went to Japan after the war, after he was president, he tried to organize them to stay at peace with China. And he wanted to organize affairs around the world to be peaceful. Look at George Washington after the war. After he's a soldier, he had 8 years as a leader of the revolution. And he knew what this was. He wanted the U.S. to be at peace. Look at General Eisenhower, who led the invasion of Normandy. What did he do in 1956? Was that when Israel and Britain and France invaded Egypt?
Yeah.
He said, no, this is going to cause a disaster in the world. And he forced the British to withdraw, and then the Israelis didn't have cover for that, so they and the French had to withdraw.
Right.
These are leaders who had real experience with war, not like these pundits who are saying we should have an escalation and risk the incineration of the human race. None of them are real seriously knowledgeable about what they're doing. They're just following a pleasure principle in a sense, because to keep their position in this clique. We have to distinguish them from an American interest, which is a parental interest for leadership.
Yeah. Amen. No, thank you for this public service announcement, Anton. Very much appreciated. And I think you've given citizens, American and global alike, a lot to think about here and a lot to chew on. I know your new book is also coming out soon, so people should go to your website and keep an eye out for that. Who We Are, which is whoweare.com. I think they'll be able to pick that up.
Go to substack.com.
Anton Chaitkin. Okay, antonchaitkin.substack.com.
That's right.
Is the place to go. Your first book, also essential reading, or not your first, but your most recent book that's already published, volume 1 of Who We Are. I couldn't recommend that people pick that up immediately and study that as you prepare to jump into volume 2 that will be coming out shortly. Anton, thank you so much, and I look forward to future conversations. And for everyone, thank you for listening.
Thanks, Matt.